because something very interesting happened across the southeast today. There's so many things that I could say about this right now, but we're actually going to bring in Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich. He is at our sister station in Boise, Idaho, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the fireball, the bolide, the something crazy that happened in the sky today, Brad.
Yeah, kind of rare that you see a meteor during the daylight hours. You had to know that it was probably going to be a bolide or a piece of space debris, because typically a lot of these meteors, the size, guys, is only about the size of a grain of sand, and they're usually high up in the atmosphere. This one actually was much, much lower, so low that you actually heard sounds. There's some ring camera from central Georgia of that meteorite making it probably to the surface, and we have possible impact at a home there in Henry County. So this is really unique, the fact that you actually have a bolide meteor in the middle of the day, but also the chance that somebody's going to find a meteorite or a meteoroid, which would be super valuable. So even though they had damage to their house, Brittany, that thing's going to be worth some money if they find it.
I feel like someone has to go find this and find the pieces. Brad, can you talk a little bit, because I think there was so much confusion earlier today about people calling it a meteorite, they were calling it a meteor, they were calling it a fireball, like what the difference is between these multiple different things, because I know sometimes when it comes to science, it comes down to like a nuance and a little bit of semantics, but we want to be accurate in our reporting.
Yeah, for sure. So, when you hear fireball, we're typically thinking fireball meteor, and that's what basically is a shooting star. If it has enough, a light to it or flame to it, it kind of gets that nickname fireball. But when we say that, people are like, what's a fireball? It's essentially a meteor. Now, when the meteor makes it low enough and fragments or even explodes in the atmosphere, it would be called a bolide meteor. So that's one that's very rare. You only get a handful of those every year. They make some sound. You actually can get an impact at the surface. You could actually get a meteorite, which is a piece of debris that makes it all the way to the surface. So most of the meteor showers you hear about, or most of the meteors or fireballs that we have, are high up in the atmosphere. They never make it down to the ground. So you're not going to actually hear or see them. So this is why this one was so rare. And the fact that it happened during the day, Brittany, means it was probably pretty large. I mean, maybe the size of a golf ball. When I say large, it's the difference between a grain of sand and a golf ball is pretty significant, meaning it likely survived most of its travel down to the surface.
So I know that we got reports of people seeing it in South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, I believe Georgia. Well, obviously Georgia. I don't know if I'm missing a state, James, but you posted
Virginia,
online
Tennessee,
about how people were getting confused as to like how close it was to where they were based on their location and just like the curvature of the earth. I know that sounds like very basic geography, but can you talk more about like if someone is in Lexington, South Carolina, I feel like, for example, we saw a lot of reports there of people thinking that it happened right where they were, but they were technically further away than people in Georgia who saw the bits and pieces. Can you talk about what people should be looking for maybe when they see a fireball or something like this? Because just because you can see it doesn't necessarily mean it's close to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just because this happened in Georgia doesn't mean you only saw it in Georgia. You got to remember, the top of the atmosphere, we see the space station fly over all the time over the entire East Coast. When there's rocket launches from Cape Canaveral going up the East Coast, we see them. So you see them over a large area. When they're low on the horizon, that means it's really far away. If it were to be right over you, it would be straight above your head. So because of the curvature of the earth, that's why everybody saw it from Virginia, Tennessee, all the way to South Carolina and North Carolina. So from your perspective, depending where you were, if it was very low in the horizon, that could have been 2 states away. But you got to remember too, it entered the atmosphere at the very top, so that's visible over a really large area of the southeast. So just because you saw it doesn't mean it happened over you. It could have happened 2 states away, just like when we see those SpaceX launches going up the East Coast. I mean, that's well off the East Coast, but we're seeing them in Charlotte and western North Carolina because it's getting high up in the atmosphere and the sun's illuminating the vapor trail from the rocket. So it's just kind of a visible, it's a point of view, and sometimes I think people confuse the fact that, hey, it happened in Georgia, why did I see it in North Carolina or even South Carolina?
It's like when there's a thunderstorm in Rock Hill, but we can see it from Charlotte, and people are like, oh my gosh, it's storming in Mecklenburg County, and we're like, no, You can just see it because
Well,
it's so high up in
we
the
see storms
atmosphere.
at the beach all the
I'm
time.
just curious.
Yeah.
This is not on our talking points James and I talked about, but so this happened today. You're at a conference for the American
Yeah.
Meteorological Society, not to be confused with the American Meteor
Yes, not to be
Society.
confused,
How
yeah.
was it being there with
Yeah.
like a bunch of essentially science nerds that think this stuff is so cool? Like, were you
Yeah.
guys chatting about it, trying to figure out what it was? Going back to your stations and giving information. Just how was that? I just feel like it's a cool story to happen while you're already at that conference.
Yeah, so ironically, the American Meteorological Society doesn't study meteors. We actually study weather. But the word meteor actually comes from a Latin word that means you study anything that fell from the sky. And as you know, we call raindrops hydrometeors, right? So in this case, we study things that fall from our atmosphere, not technically from outer space. But ironically, one of the first talks this week at the American Meteorological Society talk was on meteor showers and talking about them on air, kind of the station scientist part of what we do. So we did talk about early in the week and some of the things to look out for. Now, while this happened today during the sessions, most people had no idea. I was actually meeting with some of our corporate folks, and so I knew about it right away. We jumped into your stream there back at the station, and so we started talking about it. But people started walking out of the sessions and hearing about it, and then looking at like the global lightning mapper from GOES, which was a pretty cool way to kind of see where this bolide occurred. Because typically, the global lightning mapper is an instrument on the GOES satellite that detects flashes of lightning. Well, if you see a flash and there's no cloud there, you're either getting sun glint off of maybe a big, solar farm, or in this case, it was because it actually detected the flash of the meteor entering the Earth's atmosphere. And so that was one way you could use some of the weather technology we have to kind of figure out where these happen. You also can use Doppler radar. When these things get low in the atmosphere, the Doppler radar can actually detect it coming down to the Earth. So I'm kind of curious to see if the Peachtree City office will actually see some of this on their next rad Doppler. And they were actually posting some of the images earlier of what was falling into Georgia, because it was really close to their office there in central Georgia.
Yeah, there's been so much chatter online, especially after yesterday. The radar site, what was that, over in Alabama, had to do a reboot, and people were freaking out, thinking that we were like being attacked or something. So with the fireball on top of it, I just feel like social media, especially when it came to people who are interested in weather, interested in science stuff, it was just going a little bit crazy. We did see the graphic.
This is a pretty rare event.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I can't hear you actually here in the studio unless James turns you on.
Well, James, you got to turn me on, James. That's what you got to No, I was going to say, it's a pretty rare event. I mean, to see a meteor like this during the middle of the day is pretty rare. Bolides, like I said, you probably only get a handful of these a year in the United States or even the whole world. So it's kind of rare to see one in the middle of the afternoon. I mean, 12:35 in the afternoon is kind of rare.